Hey guys, this is your man Fred, and I am excited that you are here spending your time with me and going on this journey together so we can all grow. This is about creating badass content. And the question I have for you today is, do you have a process to create badass content before you actually start creating the content? This is very important. One of the first things I learned when I was going to design school was it is so much faster to think about and come up with a plan for your content than it is to sit down at a computer and just start going, right? Just create stuff and be creative. And I'm not telling you not to be creative because you should. I am. We should all be. And sometimes you can pull some very good stuff out of just spontaneity or spontaneous content creation or videos. But before you do, remember, this is about creating badass content and badass content that actually creates sales. That's not spontaneous, people. That's not something that we just create randomly, right? So if you don't have a process, we're going to talk about one right now. What we do here at Got Next Media is we use a system, right? And our system is plan, create, test, and engage, right? So that's plan, create, test, and engage. So we're going to go over each one of those and just give you a few simple questions that you need to ask yourself in order to get this right. So when you create the content, it's awesome content. And like I like to say, it's badass content. So when you're planning, you want to think about, who am I creating this content for? Why am I creating this content for them? And what are my goals, right? This is very, very important. Who, why, and what. If you can answer those questions thoroughly, you are so far ahead of the competition. One of the things I hate, and one of the reasons why I started creating this channel, is because so many of these big marketers and advertisers and these gurus, they tell you, all this crazy stuff, and then they make things so complicated where you can't understand it, and want to send you through these drip courses and all that stuff where you have to, figure these things out, and they teach you principles, but you still have to come back and apply it to your company. And that's not something that we want to do here. So take the time. Why are you creating the content? Who is the content for? And what are your goals? So once we get that knocked out, our next step is create content, right? We want to make sure we're creating content that is driven by the goals that we specified in step one. That is important. Time after time, I see people sometimes, sit down and create some plans, but then they go create something different. Why? That's not what we need to do, y'all. We need to create content based on the goal. And let me give you an example. If one of your goals in the planning phase was to generate sales, then that is bottom of the funnel content. And so whatever we create has to be transactional, right? We have to know that it's going to create some type of a transaction. And in this case, to make a sale. But if we determine that in our planning process that we're looking for, people to get to know us, they haven't seen us before, we're trying to get them into our stream or our funnel, we need to make sure we're creating content according to those goals. So it's very, very, very important to think about that as you are going through it and as you're going through this pre-creation process. So let's move on to the third step, right? The third step in this process is test. Guys, this is super, super important, right? You need to define how you're going to test and measure everything you create. Now, I said that pretty slow because I really want you to understand that. Do not create anything that you cannot measure. And you have to define measurement, right? You have to know how you're going to measure it and why you're going to measure it. And you should have figured this out and outlined that in your planning phase. But here you're making it completely concrete, right? And you're thinking about what steps am I going to do? Is it going to be a data measurement type thing? Is it analytics? You know, are we measuring point of sale? Are we measuring signups? You know, let's define that. How are we measuring it? Are we going through Facebook? Are we measuring it from there through, you know, one of those platforms? Something like that. We need to know that before we start creating the content. Because remember, we're in the pre-process of creating content. So before I go into this last step, let's recap right quick. So step number one was planning your content, right? Why are you creating it? Who are you creating it for? And what are the goals? Step number two is create your content. And we're in the creation process, right? So how is the type of content that we're getting ready to create matching the goals that we set? What are our goals at the top of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, or the bottom of the funnel? And then step number three, we talked about testing and measuring. This is very important, and like the old people say, it's where the rubber hits the road at, right? We need to know how we are testing and measuring. Very, very important. That brings us to our final step. What we want to do in our final step is think about engagement, right? How are we engaging? How do we plan on engaging? One of the things that, you know, I've been a consultant for a very, very long time. I've worked with a lot of small businesses. I've worked with entrepreneurs. I've worked with startups, both tech and outside of tech. And the one thing I see forgotten almost every single time, in almost every single instance, is follow-up. How are we going to follow up with them? How are we going to engage with them? If they do sign up, if we're talking bottom of the funnel, what are we going to do? How are we going to get back with them? Is it an email back to them? Did we pop them into our CRM, which is our customer relationship management program? Whatever that is, there's tons of them out there. There's too many actually. But you know, how are we doing that? Are we doing lead scoring? Are we adding marks? How are we doing it? Let's define that before we start creating this content, right? Because everything has to match, and you have to be able to run through this process to understand how it's going to create value, not just for your audience or your customers, but also for your company. That's very important. We have to grow. And if you're not doing this to grow, then why are you doing it? All right, guys, so we talked about, you know, I think quite a bit today. We talked about how to plan your content. We talked about how to think about creating your content. We've talked about how to test and measure your content. And we also talked about how to set up our engagement follow-up process. And that's pretty critical of understanding how to create badass content that sells. All right, so my name is Freddie. I am glad that you are here and we are taking this journey together. I look forward to sharing information and also learning from you along the way. All right, y'all. Peace.